The government comes a cropper in the High Court. Its draft plan for clean air will have to be published before the general election.
London was enveloped in a 40-mile belt of fog.
1952, 4,000 people died from the Great Smog, leading to the Clean Air Act. Today, the judge cited 23,000 deaths from diesel fuel and nitrogen dioxide. But are there more votes now in leaving drivers to pollute? This man was Energy Secretary in the last government. We'll ask him. Donald Trump celebrates 100 days in the White House this weekend. We're in post-industrial Detroit, where the white working-class voters still have his back.
His spirit spoke to their need for a change. When they heard somebody say, I'm going to remember you, I'm going to speak directly to you, I'm going to fix the problem, I'm the man to do it based on my experience, he won over the hearts and minds of the tens of millions of people.
And this.
I remember one very senior minister telling me that if it was the last day of an election campaign and you had a choice between canvassing a hall of residence or an old people's home, you do the old people's home any day.
Amanda Iannucci and the new president of the National Union of Students on getting young people to vote. Good evening. 23,500 deaths a year from nitrogen dioxide poisoning. That figure was cited by the High Court judge today in his ruling that the government cannot block the publication of their draft clean air plan until after the general election. They claimed publication would drop a controversial bomb into the mix of local and national elections, but that didn't wash. And after the local elections, we'll find out what Theresa May plans to do about reducing dirty diesel, the main culprit. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said he hoped that the government will urgently introduce a diesel scrappage fund to rid our streets of the dirtiest cars and give financial incentives to buy clean vehicles. Other cities across the country could set up tolls for diesel cars. What are the chances? Here's our technology editor, David Grossman.
How does the government plan to clean up our air? It is as important a question as it is urgent. But ministers are fighting shy of providing any answers. By 4 p.m. on Monday, they should have published their plan, but they asked the High Court for a delay until after the general election. The judge, though, agreed with the organisation that had taken them to court in the first place, Client Earth.
The judge listened to the government's claims that it needed to delay taking care of the public health, and he rejected them vigorously and is keeping the government to the deadline to release the final plan on July 31.
The judge was quite forthright about the public health cost of delaying any plan. What did you make of that?
The judge has read the evidence, and it was DEFRA's own evidence that up to 40,000 people a year die of air pollution in the UK. And what the judge said is merely because there's an election going on doesn't trump the public health. This is not a political issue. 1 day of delay is important. Weeks or months of delay is intolerable. That's what the judge decided, and in my view, he was right.
Make no mistake, this was a huge blow to the government's attempts to keep a lid on the growing scandal of air pollution. The judge was, in fact, contemptuous of the government's attempts to delay again the publication of a plan to clean up the air. He told them in terms to get on with it because every day of delay means people are dying.
In his judgment, Mr. Justice Garnham said these steps are necessary in order to safeguard public health. The continued failure of the government to comply with directives and regulations constitutes a significant threat to public health. A big contributor to this problem, say researchers, is the government encouraging drivers to buy diesel cars because they produce less CO2 than petrol cars. Diesel went from being under 10% of sales in 1995 to over half by the start of this decade.
People who bought diesels in good faith need to be helped to transfer to clean vehicles or alternatives to driving as much as possible. That's certainly part of what needs to happen, hence a carefully crafted scrappage scheme. But it needs to happen. We need to get rid of diesel, phase out diesel as soon as possible, and ultimately petrol too.
What we didn't know until recently is that the environmental tests that diesel vehicles had to meet bore no relation to real-world conditions. And so, the amount of particulates and nitrogen dioxide that they pumped out into our cities was far in excess of what the government was expecting. For example, the amount of nitrogen dioxide measured by this testing site on London's Marylebone Road was double the EU legal limit last year.
The government's problem is not so much presenting the plan as the price tag that goes with it. Who is going to be made to pay? The people who made the diesel cars, the people who drive the diesel cars, or the taxpayer? Either way, the best time to present such a massive bill is not right before a general election.
One group that represents drivers fears that diesel owners are going to get punished for the simple reason that they're the easiest to tax.
Only 10% of the problem comes from diesel cars. 90% comes from other things like buses and trains and roadside construction equipment. Even you're looking at sort of boilers from commercial outlets in London. 90% of NOx comes from those particular sources. Only 10% comes from diesel cars. And that's the issue that we're concerned about, because those diesel cars, those drivers, those hard-working families, the small businesses, white van man, are all expected to pay a tax hike, and that is wrong.
The government, we are told, hasn't yet decided what to do next. But as things stand, ministers will have to publish their draft plan in just 12 days' time.
David Grossman. Will Ed Davey is a Liberal Democrat who served in the coalition government as Secretary of State for Climate Change from 2012 to 2015. Matthew Penshars was London's Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy under Boris Johnson and now works in the sustainability industry. Good evening to both of you. The statistics are absolutely shocking. Why does it need a court to make the government come clean on plans for diesel?
Well, it's a good question. Conservative ministers should be hanging their heads in shame. They've prevaricated, they've not taken action, they're trying to hide this from the electorate when this is a public health scandal. People talk about public health issues, but the air pollution, the damage it does to people's health, is bigger than the crisis of obesity and alcohol abuse. It's that significant.
There's no justification for the delay, was there? There's no justification for trying to... It was going to be some huge controversy if it came out before the general election. What could that possibly be?
Well, I think your report kind of sums it up. They don't want to go into an election, understandable from their point of view, with punishing diesel drivers. Now, that doesn't strike me as good governance. They should get on with it. But I think politicians up on the stump don't want to face, I think, as their QC put it, the Tory tax on diesel plan. But we have known about this problem for years. And since 2010, we have been nowhere near the EU limits. So it's a plague on all your houses, every politician, every advisor.
Well, in the coalition, Liberal Democrats took this seriously. Vince Cable made big step forward with electric vehicles. If you look at what Norman Baker did as a transport minister, he set up the Green Bus Fund. I did a lot on energy efficiency in homes, because that's really important, because actually a lot of the nitrogen dioxide comes from burning gas. So we took a big issue, but we had rows with our Conservative colleagues.
Let's be clear. I mean, I would suggest that the coalition perhaps was no better, because the Environmental Audit Committee in 2014 said the government had failed to face the problem. You were the government.
Well, we were the Liberal Democrats side of the government.
You were the government.
The Liberal Democrats in the government took action. Our Conservative colleagues wouldn't. So, for example, the people who are in charge of this are people like Owen Paterson at DEFRA, who failed to take it seriously. Vince Cable did, Norman Baker did, I did, Liberal Democrats did. And traditionally...
But you were impotent.
Well, no, we took action, which helped, but our Conservative colleagues, time and again, refused to act.
Well, I'm not suggesting that you are the Conservative government. You were the Deputy Mayor under Boris Johnson. You know a lot about this issue. What do you think the measures are in the draft plan?
Well, the first thing I should say is that from my experience, the coalition government didn't step up until it was forced to by losing in the Supreme Court around 2 years ago. And I have to say, from my experience at City Hall, Liberal Democrat ministers were not... were just as difficult to engage with, I guess, than their Conservative counterparts.
You were difficult to engage with on
we
this.
took action, but let's talk about Boris...
let me just answer that point.
Well, I've given you examples, clear examples of actions we took.
You're accused of being difficult to deal with.
We took action, but Boris Johnson went to Brussels to try to argue and make coalitions to undermine the European standards.
Well, in fact,
Boris Johnson, far from showing leadership, he tried to undermine action on air pollution. He was outrageous.
And of course, 2014... From 2010 to 2014, you were so far behind in London. Boris Johnson did not do enough to reduce emissions, dioxide?
Well, there's a few things. I think there's a
emissions?
few things I'd like to challenge there. The first one is about going to Brussels to water down the rules. Well, that simply wasn't true. Whenever I went to Brussels, it was trying to get those diesel real-world drivings tests to work properly, because that was some of the problems. And we had a coalition of other heavily populated industrial areas of Europe around going to the Commission, trying to get united action to reduce emissions. It was
You're not going to have to worry about united action for much longer, but can we just go back to the point, because I think people would like to know what will, in your view, be the principal measures in the draft plans?
Well, I think we're going to see more of these clean air zones. So we saw my former boss, Boris Johnson, create the ultra-low emission zone, which the new mayor, and kudos to Sadiq Khan, is bringing forward. So he's bringing forward the measures faster than we were going to bring in, and I think that's a good thing. I think you can see the government bringing more of these clean air zones. I think my concern is only that they are a bit of a blunt instrument.
But the cost, I mean, what David Grossman seems to be suggesting there, that it's not so much what you do, it's the cost of it. What is the cost of introducing
There's a huge cost on people's health. The health service is picking up a massive bill. So actually there's an overall saving if you actually take it over a period of years. And therefore the government can't hide behind cost. That's an excuse for not taking action. And we're fed up of those excuses.
But if the action is going to be tough, and it comes out for the election, I assume that the reason the government did not want this to come out of the election because they think it will have electoral consequences for the very people, the van drivers, the so-called white van man, who will be hit very badly by this.
It's absolutely right about the medical and health impacts and the cost of the NHS. And that's obviously spread widely across all of society. The difficult for the politicians is that bringing forward these diesel bans or charges is you're imposing quite high costs on a relatively few number of people. So if you look at the impact assessments for the clean air zones, the original air quality plan that the High Court ruled illegal, that was £1 billion. If you look at what the ULEZ compliance cost, it was £250 million in 1 year.
Very briefly, is it wrong to go after diesel drivers? It was supposedly, according to the witness in that film, Ed Davey, it was only 10%.
Well, we can help diesel drivers go to electric vehicles and low emissions, but it's not just diesel cars, it's lorries, it's trains, it's other aspects. If we actually are able to use less gas by insulating our homes and saving money...
And that will be in the plans?
Well, I don't know if in their plans. It's certainly Liberal Democrat plans.
Thank you both very much indeed. Now, let's turn to another potential headache for the Conservatives ahead of the general election. What should or should they not promise voters they will do on the amount of tax you pay? Nick Watts here with some insights on their thoughts. Nick?
Yes, tax is one of the big dilemmas for the Conservatives as they draw up their manifesto. Philip Hammond was badly burned in his recent budget when he said that he would increase the rate of national insurance contributions for the self-employed. He quickly withdrew that after it became pretty clear that it had directly contradicted the last Conservative manifesto, which said there would be no raise in income tax, VAT or national insurance contributions. So the Chancellor wants to avoid what he regards as the transactional approach of his predecessor, but here is his dilemma. He does not want to make specific commitments that would bind his hands, but he does need to make what allies are describing as measurable commitments to give him credibility as a low-tax party and to allow him to attack Labour as a high-tax party.
So what might we see in the manifesto on tax?
Well, might we have an echo of the formula that Philip Hammond helped George Osborne draw up in the years when they were in opposition before the financial crash, which was that a future Conservative government would share the proceeds of growth to fund tax cuts and spending increases. But the Hammond version would be much simpler. It would simply say, as the economy grows, the tax burden should fall. But he may go a step further. There is an idea that has been examined in the Treasury, and that says you would give a commitment that you would not increase the basic, higher or additional tax rate, but the Chancellor would need wriggle room to raise revenue, so he would rely on an old friend of the Treasury. It's called fiscal drag. And what that means is that you raise the threshold at which people pay higher tax less aggressively than George Osborne, and that means more and more people would pay that 40% higher tax rate.
Nick Watt, thanks very much indeed. Well, on Saturday, Donald Trump will have been president and commander-in-chief for 100 days. He's got very little legislation through Congress, and his approval ratings don't look good. 41%, substantially lower than any other modern president at this stage in his term. But how is he faring among the working-class white voters who ditched the Democrats and propelled him to the White House on the promise that he would make America great again by making mines, factories and steel mills come back to life? Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, has been to Detroit, where blue-collar workers put all their hopes in Donald Trump.
If you want to see rusted out factories scattered like tombstones to Trump's victory.
I love the way you walk. I love the way you walk.
With its recent history of industrial decline, his Make America Great Again message carried the state.
When they heard somebody say, I'm going to remember you, I'm going to speak directly to you, I'm going to fix the problem, I'm the man to do it based on my experience, he won over the hearts and minds of the tens of millions of people, and including the Michiganders that turned the state red.
I like the way you switch. You my babe, I got my eyes on you.
So where better to look for the voters' verdict on those first 100 days in office?
Of course, in a neighborhood like this in Detroit, many of the first 100 days issues that resonate in Washington have no meaning whatsoever. And if you come here looking for signs of buyer's regret on the part of Trump voters, you'll be disappointed.
In the post-apocalyptic remains of Detroit's industrial heyday, Alan Hill scavenges metal and looks to his president for change.
People have faith in Trump. You know, prior to that, previous administration seemed to kind of alienate people's ideas, you know, broke their dreams. And Trump has put a lot of faith back into the American dream.
And out where they still produce vehicles in vast quantities, you'll hear similar expressions of faith in the president.
50% of the union members in my plant voted for Donald Trump.
Across the road from the Ford plant where he works, Brian Panabaker explained why so many blue-collar workers here deserted the Democrats and why Trump's record so far doesn't disappoint.
I am 100% satisfied with Donald Trump's efforts to this point. I think he has fought very hard to do exactly what he pledged to do in terms of immigration policy, securing our borders, rebuilding our military. I have been very disappointed, however, with Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, for them not being able to implement Donald Trump's legislative agenda.
Of course, there are plenty of Trump critics here too, most notably for his immigration executive orders.
The largest Muslim population in the country is in my district. The targeting of people because of their faith, of religion, is really startling me. I know he talked about it, but you just don't understand how these communities are being divided with fear and hatred. But in some ways, it's also communities that are coming together that you've never seen come together before. And that gives you a feeling of hope in some ways, but this isn't who America is.
Issues of security, national and economic, have long run harmoniously together in this state. The Yankee Museum maintains this pristine B-17, and it was here, when it opened at Willow Run, Michigan, that the world's largest factory was built.
And they're coming off the assembly line as fast as the Fords used to.
They constructed more than 8,000 Liberator bombers here, applying the car industry's assembly line methods to weapons of war.
The fact of the matter was every 55 minutes, an airplane was coming off a production line, just this plant alone. And Germany, Japan, our enemies in the Mediterranean, there was no way to be able to compete with that type of production.
So President Trump came to Willow Run last month, promising to revive the car industry.
Thank you very much. This facility, this city, and this nation will once again shine with industrial might.
So this, it's clear, is the Trump style, a permanent campaign and a one-man assembly line of extravagant promises. One reason why Trump came to Willow Run is because here, on a part of the old bomber factory, they're planning a major new test facility for the automated vehicles of the future. So what do those who met him think of Trump's promise to bring car jobs back?
I can't comment on, or I couldn't hazard a guess on what that will mean for jobs in the auto industry. I will say this, that this technology is going to revolutionize the way we think about moving people and goods. And to that extent, the United States, if we don't focus on this technology, we will lose a lot of more jobs that are around engineering and making the system work, making vehicles work.
Near the plant, the Bomber Diner serves up Bomber burgers and a blitz of breakfast calories. It's popular with veterans, and those who've served have often been unimpressed with their new president's intemperate use of language.
He's learning how complex things are. He thought they were simple. He said, who knew healthcare could be so complicated? Now he's saying, who knew that international relations could be so complicated? Who knew that Korea or Syria could be so complicated? Well, it's extremely complicated. And so he's really done nothing in 100 days other than get a Supreme Court judge put on the bench.
So what, I asked the woman who ran Trump's campaign in this state, should we make of the discarded promises or admissions that he hadn't realized it was all so complicated?
That's what the American people wanted. We wanted somebody to say, wow, this is tougher than I imagined. I think that level of earnestness and honesty speaks to the voters that elected him. For the president to say this is tougher than I thought it was going to be, or I'm surprised at how complicated it is, I think that speaks to his strength as a man, as a person, to be willing to say that.
And if the issue of preserving American jobs is paramount here now, what to make of this? Last month, General Motors started shedding more than 1,000 jobs at a Michigan plant. Some are going elsewhere in the US, but each new factory announcement now gets scrutinized as a success or failure for Trump and the fight against globalization.
Now, you'll hear any number of reasons advanced for why things like this are still happening. From the strength of the dollar, that's one that President Trump himself has used, through to people here locally blaming uncompetitive trading practices by their rivals, dumping of goods, cheaper production elsewhere, all of that kind of language. And it is that sort of message which, of course, carried President Trump to power, but which also now informs the debate in a place like this, where even some leading members of the Democratic Party are echoing the president's protectionist language.
What we need is a level playing field. So we need to make sure that people aren't manipulating their currency. That's what I want to see. I want to see currency manipulation enforcement.
Now, I'm hearing you as a Democrat congresswoman effectively urging Trump to remain true to his campaign platform.
But I've said, you'll go look, you'll find me in August of 2015. I'm really and said Donald Trump was exciting people. And I have said, I think people, I don't agree with him on many things he's done. My responsibility is to work for the working men and women of my district. And if he's willing to do something that's going to fix bad trade policies that have hurt their jobs, my job is to work with him to do that.
Viewed from Michigan or Middle America more generally, the effort to revive the economy and protect jobs form the central narrative of Trump's administration so far. In that sense, he's redefined politics here, even if he's far from demonstrating that he's found the answers.
I got my eyes on you.
Well, Mark is in Washington tonight. Mark, we saw Trump supporters there standing by their man, and something has become a little bit clearer on how he wants to kickstart the economy.
Well, absolutely, Kirsty. I mean, if you are in a place like Michigan, you think, how on earth can you really reverse the tide of industrial decline? Now, one of the key answers unveiled this week is an ambitious plan for tax reform. It's being billed as the most ambitious ever. Central to that are plans announced by the Treasury Secretary here to cut corporation taxes by a huge margin, from 35% of profit to just 15%, to cut personal taxation bands from 7 to 3 and reduce the overall burden of personal taxation. Now, they argue that if they cut these corporate taxes, many companies, famously Apple, which has kept hundreds of billions in profits overseas, will repatriate those monies, the tax take will go up, and offset the fact that obviously by cutting it from 35 to 15%, you've got a massive decrease in your tax. And that money, as it's repatriated, could also be used to fund R&D and new factories and all the rest of it. Now, that is their message, but many Republicans in the Senate and Congress don't believe that message. They feel that this is a dangerous gamble, that the loss of tax receipts could easily be $1 trillion in the first few years of this ambitious change, and that how on earth would it be funded other than by running up huge new debt? That, if you like, will be the central gamble of the Trump platform to revive the economy.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Now, Newsnight, the part of the programme designed to get under your skin, where strong views are mandatory. While the manifesto writers are wrestling with what to promise and not to promise after June the 8th, one of David Cameron's former speechwriters, the commentator Julian Glover, suggests a radical way to make our highways super.
It's time to pay as you drive. No one likes roads. There are no fans of the M25, no spotters on the A1. They are potholed, noisy, dangerous, uncared for, congested, and getting worse. We hate them when they are full, and we protest when they are built. And yet they are absolutely essential for every bit of modern life. Everything we buy goes on a road. Every journey by bike, by bus, car, taxi, van, lorry, all of it needs roads. And in Britain, our roads are awful. Ministers claim to be investing billions, but it's a trick. The Treasury's hooked on taking tax from vehicles and spending it on other stuff. Only a third goes back into roads. There's no money to cut deaths from pollution. Potholes everywhere. No one has a clue what it really costs to drive or what you get in return. The system's broken. Inside government they know it, but they don't tell voters, frightened of the inevitable Daily Mail scream. We'll stand up to that. Soon the way we own cars, power cars, the way computers will drive them for us, everything's going to be different. Old taxes don't work. Electric cars don't pay. Income from petrol will fall. So it's time to pay as you drive. Use a car, then pay the costs of congestion and pollution. Drive off-peak, then save. A better way to pay for better roads. The technology is simple. You could run it on a smartphone. Manifesto writers, it's over to you.
Well, that was Julian Glover, who's also director of the Wolfson Economics Prize, which this year is looking at ideas of how to pay for better roads. So get your ideas in now. In the 2015 election, as per usual, fewer young people voted than any other age group, following an established trend. And the chasm was its deepest between the youngest and the oldest, so 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds put a paper in the ballot box, as against a whopping 78% of over 65s. The writer and satirist Amanda Iannucci has become so exercised about this disconnect that he's been trying to brew up a Twitter storm with a campaign to get 3 million 18 to 24-year-olds to register to vote before the deadline of May the 22nd. One of his tweets ran thus: "I beg you on my gnarled and brittle knees, register to vote, then vote." I spoke earlier to the man who likes to make a mockery of politicians about his desperation to get young people to vote for them. I asked him whether he really believed that young people held this election in their hands.
I think it's important that young people engage as much as possible in the election, because if they don't, they lose. If you look at how politics has conducted itself over the last 20 years, the young vote has gone down. So a lot fewer voters between 18 and 24 vote than, say, voters over 65. So as a result, people over 65 are courted by politicians. I remember one very senior minister telling me that if it was the last day of an election campaign and you had a choice between canvassing a hall of residence or an old people's home, you do the old people's home any day, because they're the ones who are going to vote. And as a result, young people have been abused by the system. It's young people who've had their housing benefit cut, their education maintenance allowance cut. They're not part of the living wage until age 25. They're an easy target. So the more young people vote, irrespective of who they vote for, the more they have something that politicians are after, which is a vote.
But don't you want young people to vote in a particular way? So you would like young people, I imagine, to vote for Remain candidates, or tactically vote for Remain candidates. So in fact, you only want them to vote if they vote your way.
No. I mean, this is how democracy works. I've no idea how they'll vote. I saw one opinion poll that showed that young people might split more in favour of the Tories this election. Do you know what? I'd rather they voted than they didn't vote, because it's also about how politics is going to function in the future. If politicians rely more and more on the fewer and fewer people who do come out in elections, it does mean that a larger and larger percentage of the population are just ignored and forgotten about.
So should young people be allowed to vote at 16, as they did in the Scottish referendum?
Yes, I've advocated. I thought that, I mean, initially when that was announced in Scotland, I was a little bit concerned, but actually the level of debate, the excitement, and also the fact that 16 and 17-year-olds for the first time felt really involved in fundamentally important decisions about their country's future, really galvanised an interest in politics. So I'm all for opening that up. I mean, David Cameron was given the opportunity to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the EU referendum, and he said no, because he was thinking about how it might affect the Tory vote in the future. If he'd said yes, then he may well be Prime Minister still.
But don't people 65 plus have as a legitimate right to have their views heard as people under 25?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not suggesting that they stay in. And I'm also saying, if you think none of the above, then spoil your paper. I don't care. I just want you to get out and register, because as soon as you register, you have that one thing that a politician needs off you, which is a vote.
But isn't there a terrific irony in this? Because you, Amanda Iannucci, have spent much of your life writing brilliant satire about the terrible state our politicians are in, the thick of it here, Veep in America, satirising politicians for being venal, being stupid, pursuing their own agendas. So you kind of undermine politics in a way, don't you? Because the people say, well, why should I care about them?
Well, no, I mean, what's happened there is I've responded to that in my own way, which is through doing things like the thick of it. I think you cannot change politics. If you're angry, like I've been angry about the state of politics, but if you care about politics as much as I care about politics, you have to do something. And I think that something must start with at least registering, showing an interest, and then getting out and voting.
And are you putting your hand on your heart and truly saying that it actually doesn't matter to you if every single person between 18 and 25 was, for example, to vote for Theresa May? It wouldn't matter to you?
Well, I'd be surprised. A British Prime Minister, if they have a massive majority, have total power. So I'd say, even though the headlines are saying huge majorities are inevitable, if young people are looking for a reason to try and make any kind of a difference, then at the very least they might be interested in seeing that majority, that total power, that sort of elected dictatorship, as Lord Hailsham once described it, is minimised.
But, here we are,
yeah.
Here you are, and why should young people listen to you? They know they've made up their minds. They understand politics. They understand the system.
I don't know.
They don't necessarily want you to tell them what to do.
No, of course, and I'm not going to tell them what to do, but you invited me on the programme.
Absolutely.
I didn't ring up and ask.
But you've been tweeting like crazy.
Yes, well, you've been reading my tweets and responding.
I always do. I always do. So here you are, Amanda Iannucci, who is an Italian Scot, who lives near London, who plies his trade sometimes across the Atlantic. What kind of Britain do you want to live in?
I want to live in a Britain that has a fully functioning democracy. And, I've been writing for some time about how people are frustrated by... I mean, we now have a system, we still have a system whereby in the last election, 37% of the people who voted Conservative, and yet they gain a majority, a working majority with other parties of about 20. I just listened to when Theresa May announced the election. And she said she was announcing it because Parliament couldn't agree with her on serious legislation. Now that sounded to me like how a proper functioning democracy should work. And the fact that she could casually announce that as a flaw in the system that needs to be corrected and ask for a mandate that allows her to get whatever she wants without opposition, I find a worrying trend.
Do you see the possibility of a satirical episode in that?
Let's see how it plays out in front of us in reality first.
So are you ready to go back into television satire?
At some point, yeah.
In Britain?
Who knows? I just want to get this election out of the way first.
Amanda, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Shakira Martin, who just yesterday won the election to become the next president of the National Union of Students. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Let's deal, first of all, with national politics. Amanda Yanushi says there, you know, politicians are obsessed with older people. That's the votes that they're trying to quote because more than 70% vote. Let's just take something like the triple lock-in pensions, which actually Jeremy Corbyn is wedded to, much more so than even the Tories. The triple lock-in pensions guarantees pensions next year at least 2.5% increase a year. Why not campaign to take that away from pensioners and actually use it for increasing apprenticeship wages, you know, reducing tuition fees, making affordable rents for young people? Why not actually take that and say, don't spend it there, spend it here?
So I think there's a few things. Pensioners go out and vote. It's almost a guaranteed vote. So when elections are happening, they're guaranteed to come out. So they need to have a promise to the older generation, and that's through pension.
But that's a kind of chicken and egg, isn't it? Because actually, they pander to them, you could say, because they come out and vote. But if young people went out and vote, they might actually pander to you.
So I think there's a few things. Firstly, it's about making politics engaging and translatable and relatable to young people. Many young people and students that I speak to, they find politics unrelatable. When they see politicians speaking, they don't look like them, they don't sound like them, and they don't see the link between how politics is related to their everyday life. And for that reason, they're kind of disenfranchised and disengaged in politics.
But they partly think that because of the way that politics is conducted, for example, on student campuses, that it's kind of narrow and niche, and actually things like trans issues, no platforming, cultural appropriation, you know, that is very, I would say, it doesn't brook broad argument. It looks like you know, you can't afford to argue with this or you'll be kind of struck down.
I think it's more simpler than that. Before we can start getting young people to understand the importance of freedom of speech, we need to get them to understand the importance of shaping their generation and the society that they would like to live in, and the importance of, you know, them exercising their democratic right by going out and voting, and that is the way in which they can make change.
But you know, do you think that young people, particularly people on campus, need to be more thick-skinned about people holding different views than theirs?
Yeah, 100%.
And so someone like Jeremy and Grace should be invited to universities?
I believe that we should encourage healthy debate, and a place for a university should be a place for people to learn, as the NUS is about supporting student unions in doing so.
Is there too much intolerance, do you think, in you know, colleges and in universities? Too much intolerance towards views that don't support your own?
I think that there's a need for some healthy discussion, and we need to promote the importance of bringing people together to have healthy debate and respecting differences and freedom of speech, but coming up with solutions together to be able to make change.
You are president-elect of one of the biggest trade unions in this country. Yeah. You know, I would think that you should actually be the heart of this election. You know, your policies should be something that politicians court need to talk to you about things. So, for example, you know, we hear tonight that on tuition fees are going to be increased. There's not going to be a commensurate increase in standards. But on the question of tuition fees, What does where is your big platform that you, as leader, president-elect of a union, will take out and actually make politicians listen to you?
So it's about getting young people to get the argument first and understand the importance of free education. I think there's a lot of young people, especially in colleges, who will be going on to universities or sixth form, who don't understand the argument, who don't know when they're making choices about universities that there's different values with the proposal of the TEF bill. And I'm really proud of the work that my current Vice President Sarana has done in separating the links between raising of tuition fees and quality. We think that students should be entitled to high quality, but not at the detriment of if you can afford it or not.
But how do you make, I mean, they're not registered to vote. There's 3 million need to register, 3 million. Isn't it your job to get out there and make them do that?
It's definitely our job to go out there and represent them nationally as the National Union of Students. I think it's something we have to do collectively. We have to be working with our communities and other organisations, giving political education and citizenship education to let young people understand the importance of voting and how that influences and shapes their future.
Shakira, thank you very much indeed. Just one front page, the FT as an extraordinary story that the EU signal over United Ireland stokes fears for post-Brexit UK. European leaders are preparing to recognise tomorrow, in fact, the potential for United Ireland within the EU, confirming that Northern Ireland would seamlessly rejoin the bloc after Brexit in the event of a vote for Irish reunification. Well, that's it for tonight. We end with the news of the death at the age of 86 of Leo Baxendale, the legendary cartoonist from the Beano who, back in the 1950s, created Minnie the Minx, Little Plum and, most enduringly, the Bash Street Kids. Here they are at the height of their politically incorrect fame. Good night.